The revolution is real, it's live, and as some comrades say, it's lit, right? Lit. The revolution is lit.
Uhuru comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday Study featuring Chairman Omali Yeshitela. My name is Akile Anai, Director of Agitation and Propaganda for the African People's Socialist Party, as well as your MC for this morning. Today's study will be on counterinsurgency and how our party managed to survive one of the most brutal acts of it in history, the war without terms that was launched against the African liberation movement in the 60s, in all instances before and after by the imperialist world to prevent Africa and African people from gaining control over our own future. Understanding counterinsurgency is fundamental in our struggle for power because to understand it is to find a way to beat it, which Chairman Omali Yeshitela and our party was able to do. We will be reading from Chairman's most recent book, Vanguard, the Advanced Detachment of the African Revolution, the Political Report to the 7th Congress, Chapter 3, titled, How the Party Survived the Counterinsurgency. You can follow along with the document that was received by all people who registered and also in your Facebook and YouTube descriptions. It is my honor to turn it over now to the leader and founder of the African People's Socialist Party, the one who, despite the vicious, bloody assault that came against our movement when so many were jailed, killed, or ran away from the responsibility of revolution, continued the task of leading and developing our struggle to bring us where we are now. Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Thank you, Director Akile. First thing I would like to do is offer self-criticism. On last week when we did this study, I was extremely rude in a response to someone who came on and made an attempt to extol capitalism. And my response to it, I feel, was rude and it was very sharp. I think sharp responses are okay. And I think that even rudeness can be okay depending on the context of the discussion and political struggle that we might be involved in. But the fact is that we do this and began this Omali Taught Me process every Sunday at 8 Eastern Time as a project initially designed to provide political education to the Department of Agitation and Propaganda of the African People's Socialist Party. And this is because we have experienced a rapid growth of party membership and people coming into areas of responsibility that had no political background, no ideological background. So it was important for us, I felt, to initiate a process that we could escalate the ideological and political development of people who had the responsibility in the African People's Socialist Party for political education, for the production and distribution of the ideas of the party, inside the party and to the world. And so this is the basis of this study, and it's grown into something else now that involves thousands of people. And again, this was not designed and is not designed as a debating forum where we attempting to contend with 1,000 different ideas. This is a study, and this study is based on African internationalism, and I guess that sometimes gets overlooked, sometimes even by me in this process, but that's what it is. And nevertheless, that is not an excuse for how I responded to the comrade who came on to this study of the African People's Socialist Party to extol capitalism and an assault on the idea of socialism. But the response should have been different. And the response should have been one that, as opposed to assaulting the intellect or perhaps even the integrity of the person who made raised the question or put forth the comment, we would have been better served if I had simply responded to the actual content, the question, the accusation of the superiority of capitalism that was suggested, and the problems with socialism. The basis for my saying this are many. One is that too often today we don't engage in political debate, ideological struggle and debate. And even though I mentioned at the beginning of this study that this is a study and it's not a debate forum, I think that it would have been better for me to have, it's no matter of thinking, it would have been better for me to have responded to the question, and if it had got deeper, much deeper than that, I could have responded differently. The problem that I think my response contributes to is the possibility of people being hesitant to raise questions or to make comments that may appear to differ from what we are saying here, to the extent that you do not get the benefit of a thorough discussion, because there are other people who may have the same questions, who may have the same doubts. And if those questions and doubts do not get put forth and are not treated, rather, in a very serious way, then it's possible that people will hesitate to raise questions and to put forth ideas that in some instances will contend with what we have to say. So I'm self-critical for that, because I don't think it served us well. I don't think it served the study well to attack the person who's raising the issue in a way that allows the question that's being raised to go unaddressed. So having said that, I want to go ahead and begin. But in beginning this, I think it's important to say that you will notice in this study and many other studies that we do that we talk a lot about what the African People's Socialist Party has done. And we were the only ones, and we were the first ones, and we did this and that. And sometimes, to some people, it may allow us to sound like the Little Richard of the African liberation movement. You know, well, we invented it all. But that's not what it's about. And it's not a matter of empty braggadocio. The reason we do this, and the reason we engage in this study, and we're talking about how the party survived the counterinsurgency up to this point, is because that's what will allow us to continue to survive and to move forward. That history is ongoing. It's there, and we are part of a continuum. When we talk about what we've done and how we've survived for almost 50 years now, It is a statement of the survival of the African liberation movement itself. It is how the movement, the revolution, has survived despite all of the contradictions, the attacks on the revolution, etc., in Africa and here and other places around the world. We are still here. And it's really important to say that we are part of a continuum, because there are many people, as we know, who've come into political life relatively recently. And though they've come into political life relatively recently, the starting point of their understanding too often is the point where they came into political life. And so what we will find is people just discovering, for example, reparations. I was in a meeting recently where somebody says that a problem with the movement, or our participation, talking about the people who were in that meeting, more than people in the African People's Socialist Party, with the issue of reparations, is because there's never been a mass attempt for mass involvement in the reparations movement, because that's not true. That's just absolutely, totally, it's so untrue as to make people who've been working on this question of reparations and for the last 40 years, and people who, and an organization in the form of the African People's Socialist Party that actually created the first mass organization in the history of the world to deal with the question of reparations, and who spread the reparations, who consciously made a determination that we will make reparations a household word. We said this, and we said this going back to the late 1990s and into, I'm sorry, the late 1970s into in 1982, when we held the first tribunal on reparations for African people. We did this in 1982 in Brooklyn, New York. That forum that we created for the purpose of winning masses and bringing masses of people, Africans, into the debate around reparations, because it was clear to us that reparations would never be achieved, would never be won, unless it became something that the masses of African people were involved in. Not in simply going to this congressional thing or the other, not in simply trying to win some court case, but mobilizing masses of African people. So at the juncture where African people worldwide and inside the United States, the masses understand that reparations are due us because of what the U.S. has, and white power, imperialism, the whole capitalist system, how it came into being through the stealing and ripping off every resource that African people had, and that it deprives, this system deprives us from achieving resources today. At the point this happens, at the point this gets the traction, it was clear to us all along that the reparations is no longer some question of a court deciding, yep, you ought to get it, or a legislature saying, yep, you ought to get it, because the masses will be in motion. And even as we do stuff in court, and people will do stuff in court, and we say, right on for that. And even as we win certain kinds of legislation, whether locally, nationally, or internationally, that, as the United Nations finally said, that reparations are due African people, even as that's happening, people on the ground, in the communities where we live, will begin to acquire, that is to say, take back the resources that belong to us, and we'll be able to take it back and then face a judge and say, you can't say that I stole this when I'm stolen myself, and everything that has come from black people has been stolen from us. I am simply retrieving what should be mine anyway. And then the moment that begins to happen with great enough sufficiency, the whole social system is thrown into disarray. It cannot sustain itself. The court system can't work without the cooperation of African people who have been criminalized. And it is, the court system itself rests upon the foundation of the criminalization of African people, to the point that Africans decide that we are not the criminal, but the court that's trying me is the criminal, trying to defend the relationship that has come about as a consequence of stealing everything we've got. We've understood this for a long time. And the point that I'm making is that there are people who just came into this movement and don't understand why it is today that that people who are contending for the nomination, the presidential, for the Democratic Party for presidency, are talking about reparations. Why Oprah Winfrey will be talking about reparations. Why the Breakfast Club will be talking about reparations. It didn't just fall out of the sky, some kind of mass epiphany from the petty bourgeoisie or liberal bourgeoisie occurred that would have them talking about reparations. No, this has been 40 years of work, and the African People's Socialist Party has been in the vanguard of making this a mass issue. That's what I'm talking about, why it's important for us to know it, so that, that at some point, when people come into political life, they need to be able to understand that they are a part of a continuum, and the African People's Socialist Party is what allows them to understand that, and allows us in the party to understand the critical role that we play in this process. So, and there's much more that could be said, and some of this inferred in this document that we'll be looking at today. And where we'll be going now, I think, is from, we're going to have to treat this as a two-part study. And we will be going now from what is page 63 in the document that you have to page 90. So, comrades, this is chapter 3 of the political report to the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. And chapter 3 has the title, How the Party Survived the Counterinsurgency. Comrades, since the inception, since its inception in 1972, our party has been the only force that, through theory and practice, exposed the historical basis, both for the rise of the Black Power movement in the 1960s and its demise. We are the singular voice that waged tireless political struggle and fierce on-the-ground campaign, showing that the demise of our courageous movement of the 60s was brought about by a violent and devastating U.S. government counter-offensive known in military terms as counterinsurgency. The will to struggle and the heady confidence of the African working class feeling the power of its own leadership did not go out of style or lose favor among the masses as fabricated in the United States government narrative of our defeat. And that's really important. Our movement was defeated. And after the defeat of the movement, a host of neo-colonial petty bourgeois forces working, whether consciously or unconsciously, with the United States government and other imperialist powers have been forwarded as the representatives of our movement, and it has impacted on the confidence and consciousness of the masses of African people who were responsible for every victory that had been won up to that point, responsible for the need of the United States government to initiate a counterinsurgency. By the mid to late 70s, almost all those who so-called revolutionary African leaders and organizations inside the United States government and around the world that had actually survived the U.S. government's murderous assault were now compliant with imperialism's myths about what happened to us in our historical liberation struggle. There are people who hate revolution, who hate revolutionary organization under the leadership of the working class. And the African working class, that's true, working class in general. This assault that's being made on Venezuela today in part is an assault on a government that presumes that the workers are the ones who should hold authority and power over our own lives and existence. You look at Venezuela, where the president is a bus driver, a former bus driver. And what does that mean to all the bus drivers of the world, all the people who work for the world, as opposed to this in the United States, where the president is a self-proclaimed billionaire, and obviously the bus driver and the people who are workers want to create a world where bus drivers and working people can have a quality and decent life, and the billionaires want to create a world where the billionaires will have everything at the expense of the workers. So if you see the workers who are in motion to try to capture power, it is to capture power that's at the expense of the billionaires who dominate the world and who got to be billionaires as a consequence of ripping off, looting the resources of the workers. So contrary to the ruling class lies, the African working class did not suddenly develop a preference for heroin and